Our guest today is a well-known sports psychologist. He's written or co-written 5 books, 2 that we'll speak about today, The Competitive Edge and The Winner's Brain. He's a Harvard clinical psychologist, a psychologist for the Boston Marathon. He's appeared on ESPN and a number of high-profile news and sports shows. A Lebanon athlete who excelled on the baseball field and continued his athletic career at Southwest Baptist University. He earned a master's degree at the University of Central Missouri, then Central Missouri State, and then earned his doctorate before going on staff at Harvard. I'm David Millsap, and in the box today is Dr. Jeff Brown. I can't tell you, Jeff, how pleased I am to have you and how proud we are of you and your success that you've had writing, the stuff that you've done in sports psychology. But there is one important question that I've got to ask. Have you changed from this to this?
Oh, you would bring that up. I get asked that quite a bit. So when you wear them backwards, you keep a lot of friendships still intact that way. So it's hard. I had to make some decisions when I went out to Boston, and that was one of them, because you either are heckled everywhere you go if you don't have a Red Sox hat, and I do have many at this point. But I am needing a St. Louis Cardinals hat. I'm curious what size that one is. I might be walking out of here with that one today.
You know, I spent about 3 weeks at Boston University at the Senior Management Institute, and that was about a mile from Fenway. So I spent most of my time at Fenway. They're as loyal a fan base as the Cardinal fan base, and they're really tied to their team as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's something magical about going to Fenway. I talk to a lot of people here who say, if I could just go to Fenway Park, and it's like, it's really a privilege to step into history is how I look at it. Just like we've had our series of stadiums here in Missouri, Fenway just hasn't changed since 1912, the same year the Titanic sank.
Right. Unless you've been there, you really don't get the atmosphere. The same at Wrigley Field. I don't know if you've been to Wrigley, but
Dad and I went several years ago.
So I want to talk about your life as a sports psychologist and some of the work that you've done. And you've written a very good book, and you said this book now out of print, but I've had this book for a number of years, and I told you years ago that I've used it in leadership classes. It's called The Competitive Edge. I probably read it 15 years ago, and I still go back to it to read it. But every time I read it, I just get this sense that Jeff Brown from Lebanon, Missouri, even though teaching at Harvard and all the accolades that you've had as a sports psychologist, it's still Jeff Brown from Lebanon, Missouri. And what really impressed me, Jeff, is a number of parts of this book, you quote the Bible. And I know that Christian faith that you have has been very important in your work. And how have you held on to that working at a place like Harvard, I think?
That's a good question. You know, one thing about Harvard, currently in the news, Harvard gets a lot of press, arguing with federal administration and taking positions on international conflict and so forth. I think one thing that is still true about Harvard, it is very welcoming of all kinds of perceptions. I find that the perception of Harvard is sometimes right now a bit negative, frankly. It's just the way it is. But most of the people that are there are well-rounded folks. They're interested in learning, not only about their own interests, but learning about other people as well. So I think that was one thing that was really helpful when I first arrived back in 1998. It was like, oh, these people are interested. They want to know about me. They want to know about my experiences, and I get to learn about them. And there is something about kind of our Midwestern way of life, too, where we respect people, and we generally do that before we make assumptions about others. I think we all have cultural biases. We have to search through those and figure out what we have and what we need to let go of and what we need to hang on to. But I think in general, that kind of Lebanon style of treating people in general with respect served well at Harvard, because relationships, and that's one thing I always maintain, especially today, relationships are really so important in our world right now, especially as we look at AI and we look at the impact of social media, where we're detached from people. COVID slammed us when it came to social connections, and we have a whole generation of development in kids and adolescents who didn't get to be around people for a year. I don't think that we have even understood yet the impact of shutting down the country and the impact on that socially. We've seen a lot of damage as a result of that. Whether or not you agree with shutting things down, whether or not you agree with vaccinations, the fact is, the history is that we had a whole year or more of being shut down and not having real opportunity for real relationships. Anyway, I could go on and on.
But you make it important, and we're going to circle back to a couple of those things. What I find interesting in your writing of the competitive edge and the runner's brain and the winner's brain, which you now, this book, by the way, is in its 12th printing. Is that what you told me?
It's 12 different languages.
Yeah, 12 different languages. Yeah. And it's based on some scientific things that you co-wrote. We'll get to that. But what I see out of Jeff Brown and his writing and looking at your career is that there were people that poured into you here in Lebanon, Missouri, that helped you be successful. And having known your parents well, Lo and Gretchen Brown, and I got to see your mom a lot back when I was in uniform because I had to take my uniforms in once a week for her to clean, but they really poured into you. And your success has to be based on a lot of mentorship from your parents.
Yeah, you're right. And I think I'm fortunate, blessed to be able to have had parents who did care, and they cared about not only their relationship with me, but my relationship with other people and how to interact with others and how to respect others. I think we have to do that. Our culture is so me-focused right now. And I don't think it's going to serve us in the long run, but the mentors that Lebanon has offered, incredible. And I can name people. We're not getting older, right? But I can name people from different generations that were mentors. And I think that's key. You're a mentor of mine from our days of playing baseball and then getting to watch your incredible career as sheriff, even from a distance, watching you and just thinking about you as you were reporting on things and doing things that were steps toward making Lebanon better and making it good. I think the mentors that we have had in education, in church communities, civic organizations in Lebanon are big, and I don't know that Lebanon understands how strong, historically especially, the civic organizations play a role here. I think that's incredible as far as having the opportunity, because you may have a group that you belong to at your church, but then the civic organization will have multiple people from multiple churches, and that's where you get to know those people and have mentorships. So these opportunities to get to know people and do that in a way that is authentic, I think is very, very powerful.
And your parents ran a small business, and your mom still does, Quality Cleaners here in Lebanon, and long time business. I would think that you learned from their relationship with their customer, longtime customer. My parents, longtime customers. Yeah. That you learned how to deal with people, understand people through their experience of running a small business.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and caring for people, caring for the community. I always laugh about there's so many emergency situations that people come into, and we're glad. Mom's always glad. Dad was glad to take care of people in a dilemma. How many times did the phone ring that somebody needed something, and the phone would ring at home because they had not gotten there before we'd closed or forgotten, et cetera. That's just taking care of the community. Mom and Dad started the Cleaners in 1964. They bought it in 1964. Here it is 60 years later. Yeah. And that relationship with the Lebanon community is very strong. The customers that we have are loyal, not just current customers. Mom has been talking recently about how she is now taking care of the 4th generation of customers that are coming into the Cleaners. And that's built on relationship and solid professional services that you offer people, and you make it right, and you make it work well for people.
You're spending more and more time back home,
yeah.
And you're sponsoring a night at Lebanon football, mental health awareness night at a Lebanon football game. Tell me about why you're doing that and what you hope to gain out of that.
I've spent a lot of time outside of Lebanon, but my roots have always been here, and to come back and contribute to the mental health aspect of the community is something that's growing in importance to me as I watch Lebanon, as I understand about the needs that we have here. And it's something that I feel like I'm glad to give back to the community. yes, Mental Health Awareness Night, the first ever at Jacket Stadium on October 3rd, the game against Ozark. And I reached out to Leanne Mather at the Booster Club, and I said, I know that as a sponsor, I decided I would sponsor and contribute that way this year. I said, I know that I could also sponsor something in the evening, and like giveaways and so forth. And I said, what do you think about actually not promoting me, but let's promote mental health awareness and do that. And so that's what we're going to do. I brought some victory cups. These are literally hot off the press.
Right here they are.
They're probably still warm. But these are the cups that we're giving away on the 3rd, and we want to get them in everyone's home. I'm going to read off the back of it because I think it's important, because we call it a victory cup and came up with this idea. It says a victory over mental illness is always possible. And it said everyone is a valuable member of Jacket Nation. And I really think that's important as a community. Lebanon stands behind its people. If you cross Lebanon, it stands behind those people too, right? But we understand that we all have value. And I think that it's important for me to be able to promote that. I don't need to come in and do something brand new or create a new something. There are a lot of people trying to contribute to and are contributing to mental health support and so forth. And I want to get behind that through advocacy, through legislation, through different things that I can bring some expertise that I've developed through the course of my career so far, and try to contribute that and invest that. So really, I'm hoping that people will get out there and take it home for a friend. The key piece of this, that it features the 988 number that's not only Missouri-wide, it's available nationally. But here, if you dial 988, crisis, suicide, any mental health crisis, substance abuse crisis, they'll put you right in contact with supports, so you can be making right decisions in that moment when you're having a tough time. And I think that's important.
And we hear a lot about the mental health crisis of this country. COVID, as you talked about, added to that existing issue. How did we get into a mental health crisis, or has it always been there and we didn't recognize it?
Great question. You're going to get more opinion than you will research from me right now. I think that the media and social media has created a lot of this. I think technology has created a lot of the mental health crisis. There are a few things that I think we're losing in our culture. One is a sense of delayed gratification and self-acceptance. I think that some of these things are diminished as a result of everything being available to us through technology. I was laughing. Yeah. I say, technology, it made sense. I think we nailed it with the microwave oven, and from there down, it's kind of been kind of dragging us down. How much time do you spend auto-correcting something, or correcting something that was auto-corrected in your text? I spent a lot of time undoing what technology thinks is best for me. I think we need to remember that we sort of know what is best for us. And then we need to get consultation, that mentorship, and get some input into what's best for our lives. Sometimes it's going to be hard to hear that. And we need feedback. We need to be able to be told, hey, this is something you can do. This is something that you should consider developing in your life, et cetera. I could go on and on and on and make you drink out of a fire hose. There's so many things that could be said about mental health. But I think technology, social media, some of those things have really kind of eroded the base of what we do need. Things like resilience, tenacity, work ethic. Those are things that are familiar to many generations that are still living. Some generations are struggling to understand that from a front row perspective.
So, I want to dive into this a little bit, because it's such an interesting topic, because it not only relates to your area of sports psychology, but it's far broader than that for people that, like me, that have had to hire people over the years, and we start to see this, their lack of communication skills. And to give you an instance, I was at McDonald's a couple of years ago. There's a volleyball team in there, headed on a trip, probably 15 high school girls. They're all in a corner waiting for their food. Every one of them is on the phone. Nobody's having a conversation. I don't know if they're texting one another, maybe, but we're losing that one-on-one ability to communicate, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are. And I think that's a great example of what I'm talking about with technology, things that are eroding that relationship piece, the one-on-one, how many team stories, traveling team stories do we have? And just like what you're describing, a team that's sitting there, everybody's on their phone, it's just very distracting, very detracting from relationships.
And you talk a little bit about, and see if I can flip to the passage that I use when I teach here. And when I teach leadership, both in the law enforcement perspective, but I've also taught to business students and others. And I'm starting to see this more and more. And you wrote this. Now, this is 15 years ago. It's easy to become distracted by trophies, money, promotions, and attention. So if we want to guard against grabbing the low-hanging fruit, we must realize that we're in the game for the long haul. And you mentioned that. Persistency is almost out the window. It's almost, in dealing with young people now, coaching again at Stoutland High School, is that we're not willing sometimes to pay the dues. Do you think that's true with the new generation?
It's very true. It's very true. And I mentioned it's fun to hear you read that, because talking about the low-hanging fruit, I think we live in an orchard of low-hanging fruit anymore in our culture, because it doesn't matter what you want, there's some way of telling you that you should have it, and it's available to you. And I think so. The great example right now, there's this the Boston Marathon folks. If you qualified for Boston, then you could submit to see if you could get into Boston. Well, this is just happening this week, where they shaved off a bunch of time. So even if you qualified to run Boston, which you have to run and get a certain time in a different marathon, then you can apply to get into Boston. A lot of people who qualified elsewhere still didn't get into Boston. And now there's an uproar, of course, because, and they shaved it off by several minutes, not just, that's who got in, is who had the best times. We have more people now wanting to do that. But I've already had emails from people about, well, what do you think about this? What do you, and I said, well, it has a lot to do with what you think you deserve. And I think part of trying to get into Boston is the risk that you still might not get in, even though you qualified. And people aren't necessarily satisfied. I would encourage, somebody came to me and they said, well, what should I do about this? I would say, well, why don't you focus on what was actually objective and measurable and real? You qualified for Boston. You did that. You met your goal. And I know you want to run in Boston. You may or may not get to do that, but you met your goal. And sometimes people struggle with needing the bragging rights, and I'll get in trouble for this. I'll get in trouble for this. But they need the bragging rights to say that they're running Boston, because that's what was going to feed them the most, when they missed the fact that they actually got the goal of qualifying for Boston. Now, am I ever going to qualify for Boston? I really doubt that. So people are going to tell me, well, you don't really have perspective on that. Well, I have other experiences in life that do give me perspective on not getting what you want. There are a lot of things that I've gone through that I can't have what I would like to have, and I'll never have them, at least on this earth. So I think I do have perspective on that. Focusing on what you do have is what we often forget to do, and we need to do that. The low-hanging fruit usually is the participant trophy kind of culture, that everybody gets a trophy. I laughed when years ago I was talking with friends, and their son, he was 5, and he belonged to a t-ball league, and their league amounted to something like 5 games, and it was springtime, and the first 4 games had been rained out, and the 5th game was the final game. There were no reschedules, and so they were going to go. This is so overwhelming for a 5-year-old. So they were going, and at the 5th game, they were going to get to play their game. They were going to have a participant trophy celebration and program, and then a team party to celebrate the 5-year-old relationships that they never really got to have because they never played the first 4 games. That's part of the message that we're sending.
And it's funny, because that's one of the questions I wanted to talk about, with this idea that everybody gets a trophy. And I said in a leadership group one time, and everybody was complaining about this new generation and how they have always been given these trophies. And finally, after listening to all this, I finally stood up and said, I'm going to stop you right there. We're the generation that did that. I mean, we're the cause of that. what damage, or we wanted our kids to feel good. My kids have, I couldn't tell you how many medals and trophies and throughout the years of traveling and all that, whether it was first place or fifth place. I look at my generation as parents, as helicopter parents. We hovered over our kids so much. How much damage did we do?
It's hard to measure.
Yeah.
It's hard to measure. I think that the intention was good. The intention was good. Hindsight is 2020, isn't it? I think when we don't learn to deal with adversity, and we're always sort of soothed, and parents are soothing their kids' disappointments and making it up in a very grand way, expensive way sometimes, then are we really learning resilience? That's part of it. You have to learn to bounce back. I'm far more interested in how somebody recovers from something than what they execute the first time. If you're gonna screw something up, I want to know how you're going to repair that. Psychologically, what are you going to do to problem solve? And accept the fact that, yeah, I screwed it up. I love baseball examples, right?
Right.
And so, if you're batting 350, you're still failing a bunch at the plate, but that's still very, very good. And you have to own all those failures. I think owning those failures, that's part of resilience. And we need people in our lives that show us how to bounce back. That's part of how you learn resilience, is you do go to those mentors, you go to those people, you watch those people, how do they do it? If you watched someone use excuses, blame other people, and buy your way out of a dilemma, guess what? The people that are watching you, the younger ones learning from you, that's what they're probably going to do too, because they see that as your coping strategies. And so have we really failed? Again, the intention's good. You love your kid, right? Why wouldn't you want the best for your kid? Sometimes we're also trying to make up the difference for where we feel like we didn't get something, so that's not going to happen to my kid. They're going to have this. But we still need to make sure that there is resilience being built and learning how to deal with adversity. So we still have plenty of time to do that in all stages of life. So parenting doesn't really end when your kid becomes of legal age.
I think you've written about this, the difference between outcome goals and performance goals. Yeah. Kind of tell me about that.
Yeah, it's simple to say. When a kid comes up to you and says, "Hey, I had a ball game tonight," what do we usually say? Did you win?
Right.
That's an outcome goal. The personal, the individual goal is really what we should be focused on. So when the kid comes up and says, "I had a game tonight," we should ask them questions like, "Oh, how did you hit? Did you play well? Did you have fun?" Make it about them rather than the outcome, that the value is winning or losing. Now, it sounds a little soft to say that, but if you really want to get a kid engaged, or any of us, even as adults, engaged, you want to run against yourself. You want to compete against yourself. Quit looking in the lanes on either side. Figure out what your next goal is, and then strive for that. What is it you need to accomplish next? I think that's another thing that we don't do well in our culture. We don't look at that. We're always looking, and we do social comparison. We want to know what's everybody else doing, because that's how I'm going to decide if I have value or not. Really need to be focusing on you meeting your own goal. It's just simple. Like if you go to the gym, I was at the gym this morning at 5:30. It's like, I know what I need to put on the weights, what my goal is. I don't need to look at whoever else is around, probably lifting tons more than I am, but I don't need to look at them. I need to look at what my next goal is. How many times did I get this certain weight up last time I was here? What do I need to do today that's my goal? And you have to look at those. So that's the personal performance goal that's more important than the outcome goal.
And that's what I got out of the competitive edge, that stop competing. Somebody once described me as the most competitive person I ever met, because we were doing a physical, and this particular person had beat me at the blood pressure. My blood pressure was a little bit higher than his, so I had the doctor take mine 5 times until the doctor finally said, this is not good for you.
Yeah.
But we get this mindset we have to compete against everybody else, when in truth, the competition is within, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely within. And what you bring to the table, what the next person brings to the table, everyone's circumstances are very different. And I've learned that more and more as life goes on. It's really hard to compare person to person to person. We're not all identical, which is a good thing. But my goal compared to the next person's goal should really be different. I shouldn't let somebody else define what my goals are.
Have we got away from also that we've become almost a dishonest society in that I always want to make you feel good, whether it's my employees or the kids that are playing ball for me or whatever the situation may be, that we have a tough time having a hard conversation. I call them dream crusher speeches sometimes. And I'll give you an example. You've got a kid that's a pretty, and I'm going to use baseball, though this could fit any situation. That's a pretty good little player, but he needs to be told, and I've done this, you're not a Division I baseball player. You're not a Division II baseball player. I think we can find you a place at the NAIA or Division III school. But I see so many parents do this, and so many coaches do this. Oh, you want to play at Tennessee? Oh, yes. When in fact they know that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Are we dishonest?
I think you're pointing out a habit that our culture has, and that is to not reveal accurate information sometimes when we're giving feedback. You'll get it in business more because it comes down to the almighty dollar. Mm-hmm. So if you're not cutting it, somebody's going to tell you you're not cutting it because it's going to affect their pocket. Their pocket is not often affected if they, buy into your pipe dream. I think what needs to happen in those situations, everybody needs to kind of back off from talking about the future that far away. The kid wants to, I want to play Division I. Or I want to go pro. Every kid wants to do that. And that's, junior, that'd be fun. That'd be fun. But today, you're going to need to hit the ball. And I would say focused on the here and now, because we call it a fortune-telling error when we get out into the future and we start predicting things. And oftentimes, fortune-telling creates anxiety for us because we're thinking about, I can tell you a great example of this. I had a kid who had applied and was accepted to UCLA, and he was in theater. He came into my office one day and he said, I was accepted, but part of my application, I'm afraid they're going to rescind my offer to be at UCLA. And I said, why is that? He said, because I told them that I was going to have a major part in the play at my high school, that was anticipated, and parts came out today, and I got a minor part. And I said, well, what makes it a minor part? He said, get this blew my mind, and this is years ago. He said, I only have 8 speaking lines. I said, you counted your lines? He said, yeah, I have 8 speaking lines, and the major parts have over 50. I thought, wow, we're actually counting the lines now to figure out how much value we have. Mm. And of course, the kid went to UCLA. It was no issue. He didn't lose any scholarship or anything. But he was anticipating the future and was now anxious about what he thought the future looked like. That's a kind of a negative example of anxiety, but I think we can also be thinking too much about the future, like, oh, absolutely, Junior, you can play wherever you want to play. They're going to line up. The scouts will be all parked outside, rowed up, wanting to talk to you. And okay, well, that's just not even reality. Maybe the kid is great material. We shouldn't still be giving that information at that point. We should be focusing on the here and now and what needs to be done today during practice or the game. And those goals should have well been established before having a conversation that's just kind of thin and substanceless, if that's a word. We're going to use that word today.
We use it today.
Yeah.
I often, when I'm teaching in my Sunday school class, I'll make the comment that our goal is heaven, but the objective is to be more Christ-like. Do we sometimes worry about the goal and not look at the objectives?
Yeah, because the objectives are here and now.
Yeah.
We're doing an interview today. We have things to cover. You've got your ideas about what we're going to cover. I've got my ideas about how I'm not going to screw things up. But we're in the here and now. We're talking about things right now. We're not talking about how many thousands of people are going to watch this interview and the feedback that we're going to get, and they're going to think, oh, we did a great job, or oh, they're going to be critical of what we said. We're not thinking about those things. That's a fortune-telling error. We're focused on the here and now and having a good interview and enjoying the here and now of what we're doing and knocking it out. And that's a great real-time example of how this does work. If we get too much in the future, it usually does cause the anxiety, and it oftentimes creates this hope and ambition for something that may not exist, and we've done nothing to productively even move toward that because it's kind of a fantasy.
I'm finding your conversation so interesting. It keeps me wanting to go back on different things. And one of those things is that automatic feedback is we post something online today. How many times do we check to see if you liked it? And that has to be, again, this mental health crisis. And I don't want to blame everything on social media and all that. But now I'm worried about how many likes I get, or now I'm doing this show, how many views am I going to get? Oh, somebody put a negative comment out there.
Right.
We recognize some of these issues? What do we do to solve these issues now?
I think you will always have a variety of naysayers. People they're just, we call them, in my line of work, you're going to love this term, we call them help rejecting complainers. It doesn't matter really what you say or do, they'll find fault because that's their communication style. And so when they have something negative to say, that's how they connect with people. There are probably a variety of difficulties that go with an approach to relationships like that, where you're constantly critical of people. I would find that it probably is a struggle to have a lot of people want to be around you or engage with you. We have the term troll, people that just like to stir things up on the internet and make comments or say things. I find usually that of course, I've never had any negative feedback ever, but I find that a lot of people that do that, they don't really know much about what they're talking about. And I would love to have individual conversations. That's what I think is important. If somebody's critical, bring it to the person. That's scriptural, by the way, if you want to go there.
Yeah.
But somebody likes to just kind of mouth off. Unfortunately, it's part of the culture. Again, it's kind of what does erode. I've had a lot of people, for a variety of reasons, get panicky, anxious, whatever, around something that was posted, or somebody posted something that shouldn't have. I had that with a case yesterday. Somebody called in a panic, said, I need to chat about this because something showed up and I didn't aim for it to be showing. And it's like, well, it's probably not that big of a deal. And you're imagining that a lot of people saw it and probably didn't. So some of those things we have to look at. But I realize too, when you put something out in the world on social media now, you are critiqued. And I find that a lot of people also just make comments without thinking. They think they're actually talking to you or to something that's not really human. And we've got a lot of opinions flying around these days on social media. But it's just even the events of the last week or two. So yeah.
So what I've found as I've tried to develop over the years, I think we should all be in that idea that we're going to develop a little bit, especially when you're in a leadership role, because generations change and there is a difference in generations. That building relationship is more important to the young people now that you mentor or you employ than what it was in your day and my day as athletes. And we can take this in business or sports. If the coach told me that we were going to do this, I never asked why or needed to know what the outcome of doing that meant. If the coach said, you're just going to do this, you just did that. Same thing with the boss. When the boss said, go do it, you just did it. That was my generation. Now it seems that it's important that the employee or the kid you're coaching feels like he has some type of relationship with you to make them perform. Do you see that?
I see the value in that relationship. I remember taking a psychology of coaching class years ago, and the text that was used was an old text. And it really did emphasize knowing a lot about your player, not just about their performance. I think that applies to business and so forth. As you know as well as anybody, we also have a lot of boundaries and things that we have to be mindful of, that you can't really know too much about your employees or can't comment too much about things because then you get in trouble, and there are HR rules and harassment in the workplace. So we do have to be mindful of all of that. But I do think the relationship piece is important. You'd almost do anything for a coach that you respect, and you know the coach cares about you and respects you, and so forth. I think we have a lot of coaches. One of the most important impacts that I've ever believed I've had as a sports psychologist was this. And there should be thousands of athletes thanking me. And you're going to love this. So I had the opportunity to do a keynote for the Massachusetts Baseball Coaches Association. And we were talking about how to get the best out of your athlete. And we were talking about reinforcement and relationships and so forth. And I said, one thing, coaches, hear me out. Do not punish your athletes by making them run. Do not do that. Running is one of the best things they can do for endurance, for health, for all of these things. Do not do that. And about a third of the coaches wrote that down. I watched all these heads. The heads went down. They wrote that down because I believe that to be true. You know, I've done a variety of exercises as a result of all kinds of performances, but I truly believe that because why do we want to use something like that? You know, and I could tell you story after story from mainly in college, but just things where running was used as a punishment. We know so much about punishment. Punishment does not change behavior. It doesn't squelch behavior. It creates other issues, but it doesn't help develop the behavior that you want. If something happened as a result, then you go out and you practice that behavior. One of my best memories of coaching ever, Dad and Dave Plasmeyer and I coached the 91 World Series team. And one of the things that we did with that team over and over and over, we practiced bouncing back from errors. So everybody would be in the field, and we would make error after error after error because we needed to be able to know how to respond with an error to recover and get right back on so we weren't flummoxed by an error. And I love that. And I think I work with people individually where we do that as well. We figure out, okay, let's say in this situation you screw it up. What's your plan? What are you going to do? Oftentimes that helps reduce our anxiety about performance because we're afraid we're going to screw up. But if you know you have an exit strategy or a parachute that's going to catch you if you do that, it's like, you know, what if I passed out during this interview? Okay, well, the end of the world is not going to happen. It's not. But if I think, oh my gosh, I've got to do this perfect interview with Dave Millsap because he's asked me to do this and it's an honor and I want to be able to do all this just right, then that creates this high level of anxiety for me. But if I screw it up or whatever, maybe Dave will edit. Maybe we'll do it all over again. And it's like, oh, well, then that makes me be able to relax and sit and enjoy a conversation. So having that exit strategy, knowing what you're going to do, you know, if the ball goes between your legs, who's responding? Who's going to be the most likely guy that's going to get that ball and throw it at home plate to get that runner before he scores? Those sorts of things. Anyway, I went down memory lane and
but that's so interesting because I can relate that to the work that I've done in law enforcement and personnel issues that you would have to investigate, and saw this a lot in Springfield, was that you'd have an officer that screwed something up and then was untruthful about it because he could not overcome the fact he screwed something up and tried to cover that up, when it'd have been so much easier to stand before the man and say, man, I messed this up and this is how I'm going to fix this.
Yeah.
But we've kind of got into a societal thing of, I can't accept the fact that I failed when failure is inevitable.
Right.
And stuff. And then you got to bounce back from that.
Right. And failure, and the competitive edge, my favorite chapter probably in there is the one called Making Friends with Failure.
Yeah.
And if you're not failing, you're probably not trying all that hard. You know, failure comes when you're on the edge of the cusp of getting better at something. Should be, you know, or you're brand new and you're learning something, and that's when you should be failing too. So I think when you're failing, it shouldn't be something that is, you know, I think we look back in, you know, education. If you failed something, it was terrible, and it was, right, academically. But when you're failing, you're learning a skill or a task or ability or relationship or whatever, that's what it does make you better. You take that feedback, consider the feedback. You don't have to take it, consider it. I think that's an important piece too, because we don't want to hear everything we're told. But if you consider everything you're told, some of it probably is going to be helpful.
One of the things that I talk about a lot with young people now that I'm coaching, but even with employees, is self-fulfilling prophecy. And you really mentioned that in the Winner's Brain book when you talk about self-actualization and be able to take criticism. We have a tendency, especially in sports, but in life, I'm just going to concentrate on the things that I do well. I'm not going to talk or try to work on the things I don't do well. How do you overcome that?
Mm-hmm. I think it is a matter of creating a feedback loop for yourself and understanding what your weaknesses are. You know, if you want to continue to make strides, I think of somebody who goes to the weight room and they only lift chest or they only do legs because that's what they're really good at. But the more you do that, the more it's noticeable that you're out of balance. And if you want to be balanced, try to learn some new things. Our brains, by the way, love it when we do something new and novel. It likes that. It also likes it when we go back, when we're really good at something, and we go back to the very, very basics. I don't know how many hours you've spent at the firing range. Want to guess?
A lot.
Thousands.
Thousands. Yeah.
Thousands. If you go back, your brain loves it. If you go back and you took an orientation to shooting, like if you'd never picked up a gun. I had my FFID in Massachusetts. I've had to go out and sit in a class. How many, I had science conservation at Lebanon Junior High School where we learned gun safety. That's not taught out in the state where I live. Mm-hmm. But you have to do that as part of getting your FFID and your LTC in Massachusetts. There are people there that have no idea. They've never even touched a gun. I've seen people shaking in that class because they've never touched a gun before, but they want to go ahead and pursue that. Now I have lots of questions about that.
Right.
A lot of questions about that. But the point is that our brains do love it when we come back to something very basic, even when we're expert at something. So an artist might need to go back and look at things about hues and shading and coloring and so forth. Our brains just like it when we do that. It's a good thing. It's a good thing, particularly with kids, to give a kid something that's new or novel and let their brains just sort of figure that out. It's a really nifty thing.
And you talk about in the Winner's Brain, and this is based on a lot of scientific study that you did with the co-author of this, is that the brain is willing and will continue to grow no matter what age.
Yeah, and so there are things like exercise, huge. That's one of the most important things you can do is to move and keep your body moving. It's one of the best things you can be doing for your brain because it increases oxygen, the oxygenation that your brain needs for memory consolidation, for new learning. All of those aspects do affect how our brains operate. The idea that, we only use 15% of our brain. Nope. All of our brain is being used, whether you're awake or not. It's amazing the things that your brain is capable of doing, the things they are capable of, incredible. Things we don't even know about yet. It's fascinating what our brains, what they do and how they sort information. I always say your brain is the 3 pounds you don't ever want to lose.
So I could talk to you all day about the things of your books and the stuff that you've done. But I look at athletics and the importance it is in our lives, having played or coached and been around that, followed that. What did you learn from athletics that applied to all of your life?
I would think probably the resilience piece, not giving up. I've been on the mound when I was a launch pad and the ball was going over the fence, like in historical proportions. And you have to stick that out. I love telling the story, my very first varsity game. I didn't know I was going to pitch it. Dave Plasmeyer came up, handed me a brand new white ball. I was sitting with the JV team. He handed me the white ball and said, "You better go warm up." And varsity was already on the field. And I said, he probably knew I was going to overthink that back when I didn't know to not fortune tell.
Yeah.
And I looked at him. He said, "You're starting this game." I pitched that game, got into the sixth inning, got into a situation where we could have lost the game. I had runners on, and I remember this pressure, like, oh. And my dad, by the way, made, I think, probably every game that I went to, except that one. He was in the hospital for whatever reason at St. John's in Springfield. And so he wasn't there, didn't believe me when I called him collect. You remember those days?
Yes, I do.
But anyway, Dave Plasmeyer came out, and he was walking out there. And I guess I folded mentally there just for a minute. I thought, oh, here he comes. I'm out of this. He's going to bring somebody in because somebody was warming up. He's going to bring somebody in. And he came out there and said to me, and this set the tone for so much of my life, and I've told this story. And he came out, he said, you've gotten yourself into this situation. You've come this far. Just want to come out and remind you, you're going to figure out how to finish it.
What great advice from a Hall of Fame manager, by the way.
Incredible. And I first thought probably was, crap. I thought I was out of this. But that has stuck with me. So he just came out to remind me that I was going to figure out how to finish this. And that stuck with me on so many things, whether it's been, work situations, sports. That was my sophomore year. I had 2 more years with him, a variety of things. So, and again, that came from that type of coach who I knew enough about me that I could respect that and swallow the pill he just gave me. And that was important.
Wow, that's such great advice.
Yeah.
Such great advice. I've got to ask this question before we go. Longtime psychologist for the Boston Marathon.
Yeah.
And the first thing when I read that and found out you were doing that years ago, I'm going, why do they need a psychologist at a race? Go run and get done.
Yeah.
But after reading the books, I understand that now.
Yeah.
That is they sink so much effort into that. And when things don't go right, they need somebody to talk to.
Right. And so we have a medical tent at the finish line. We actually have 2 of them. The one that's closest to the finish line, we have about 250 cots there. And, mid-afternoon, we're full. I always say it's kind of like the TV show MASH. You have casualties start coming in. And we're not talking about people that come in and need a bag of ice or a Band-Aid or some icy hot because they're cramping. We're talking about pretty significant medical issues that we're looking to treat. Disorientation. On a hot day, we'll see people that have a core temperature of 108, 109. I've seen that. Your brain is really, really cooking at that point. On cold days, we'll see people that have a low temperature. We see people have low sodium because they've overhydrated. We see cramping. We just did research. It's submitted right now, and we're just hopefully hear from a journal soon. But we found out that 1 out of 4 runners for the Boston Marathon know that they're running with an injury. So that shows you the high level of commitment and determination that so many of these runners have. So we're treating those people. A variety of issues. Athletes don't really have any higher or lower incidence of mental health issues than the general population, but we do know that people who are injured have a higher rate of mental health issues. So it makes sense. I've got a team of people. I used to do it solo, and then had another colleague of mine who joined me, a wonderful woman who I still am in touch with. She's retired, but and then we had the bombing in 2013. I was there
And
for
you were
that.
there, yeah.
I was about 50 yards from the first bomb, and there was a first responder at the finish line, and participated in kind of the chaos of all of that, and remember that very, very vividly. Learned a lot about the human response and trauma and so forth, going through that, and then also being there to help folks. But we learned so much about ourselves, the reasons people run. I've seen people that run and running in memory of someone, running for a specific cause. It gets really personal when it comes to marathon running, particularly Boston. We'll run about 30,000 people every year, and our medical team will treat about 8 to 10% of that field. So we'll see, roughly about 3,000 people either along the course or in one of the medical tents at the end of the day. So,
And a lot of them have tied that performance, and if they don't do well because they've committed so much, they have some issues. Let me ask you about the bombing just real quick. Is that how many people did you have to treat after the bombing occurred who wanted to come back and run but had the anxiety of, will that happen again?
Right. So keeping in mind there were different, it's a great question. It's a whole interview about the whole bombing experience and the mental health piece. Keep in mind that we had different layers of different types of people that fell into that day that were participants. You have all of the volunteers who were not there to be prepared to take care of a trauma scene. We have the runners who had finished before the bombing, and now some of those folks are dealing with things like survivor guilt, that they didn't have to deal with that. They're anxious. They came through and could have come through during the time. We know almost down to the minute where the bad guys were at this point, and for several days. Then you have runners who were close to the bombing. Then you have the runners that their run was interrupted and they didn't even complete. So those folks were allowed to come back and run again, if I'm recalling correctly. But then we had a lot of spectators. Our medical tent is well marked as a medical tent. So when the bombing happened, we were flooded with that. It's high security in general, definitely after the bombing, but security, you can't just walk into the medical tent. Well, we were flooded because we had spectators, we had runners, we had, most people have seen the images and so forth, and they're very accurate. The thing that you don't have access to in those images are things like the smells, the gunpowder. I remember thinking this must be what the Civil War smelled like, because that was a very vivid, and we know our brains hang on to those sorts of the smells, particularly around trauma. So that's very pronounced for a lot of people. So I think the other thing that's really impressive about that, when we're trying to look for silver linings, I was one of the last people to leave the medical tent before it was closed up, because even when we were treating people, we were still treating people in what was considered part of the crime scene. So we had, FBI was already there. They were taking clothes off of folks that we were trying to work with because they were looking for patterns and so forth from the explosion. They went right on it with doing a good job of what they knew needed to happen. But in getting people out of there, from the bombing until those of us that left the very last, was a matter of maybe 45 minutes, 50 minutes, transporting 3 and 4 people in an ambulance to get them out of there, the people that needed to be transported to the ER. So it was pretty impressive to see that happen. I was working with a runner when the first bomb went off, and my thought was, that sound, I was trying to figure out, my brain immediately compartmentalized, around here in New England, they'll fire a cannon every once in a while, but that's the wrong time. That would have been at the beginning if they were going to do that. We had recently had a manhole explosion on the north end, the Italian section. I thought, well, was that it? And then what was the other option that I'd come up with? There was something else, that maybe fireworks, but that didn't make sense either. There was no appropriate timing for that. And then by the time my brain had gone through that and made eye contact with a friend of mine who was working with somebody else, the second bomb went off. And then from there, we left to go to the finish line and try to help people.
You're right, and my apologies to my editor. He can do whatever he wants editing this, because this is also very interesting. 1997, I was on the scene when an officer got shot. I was around the corner, out of harm's way, but he got shot. I remember when they brought him out, I heard the gunfire, didn't know what happened. They bring the officer out that had been shot. He survived. But my first thought, and this was odd, was, well, that's not supposed to happen. And so you, as a psychologist, concentrate on the effects of running and not missing an objective or something of that, or a time, or I didn't complete the race and I was running from my grandma who had cancer and all that type of stuff. You're not prepared for that. How did you cope with the bombing?
Yeah, I think in real time as it was happening, psychologists, if we've had some trauma training, I think we all agreed as providers that day that wasn't part of our agenda. It wouldn't be something we would have imagined. But I think trying to stay grounded when I'm trying to help people. So I focused on helping, and I knew some of the things that we should be doing with people to try to mitigate some of their trauma response later. I remember one spectator that came into the medical tent who I was working with, and she said, "Why did they do that? Why did they do that?" And I remember telling her, I said, we don't know why they did that, but it's not something they should have done, and it's not your fault. I think it was important for her to hear that. As I would never know her again, she would never know me, but giving her that information early in the trauma, because oftentimes with trauma, sometimes we personalize it because we try to make sense. So one of the first things we do to make sense of something was blame ourselves. And it's important for her to be hearing. I said, I don't know why they would do that, but it's not right, and it's not your fault. Another mom who was in one of the cots stopped me, and she said, "I'm really scared right now." And I said, "What's that?" She said, "I don't know where my kids are." And I said, "Well, where were they last?" She said, "I put them in a cab and told the cab driver to leave with them, and she was injured." And I said, "Your kid will be fine." "Oh, you've got a Boston cab driver on your side. Your kids are probably eating well at his house right now." But it was that kind of survival decision making that people were making, and that's what you do. And it goes back to a lot to be said about resilience and so forth. So we provided support for our volunteers. We provided support for runners. I participated in some webinars that we did on an international level for runners. Because imagine if you're from a different country, we have north of probably 60 countries that participants that come in from that many different places just to be in Boston and to be here with an event like that happening. So, and not knowing what supports people have. So we tried to offer that as much as we could.
Jeff, thank you so much for this.
Absolutely.
Oh, great visit. And I explained to him that I know he's Dr. Brown, but to me, he is Jeff Brown. So I will call him Jeff at the end of this conversation. A lot to unpack. Very important information, both if you're an athlete, a coach, a business person, or just understanding that you really compete with yourself. And this book is out of print, but I'm telling you, this is a great read. I would also tell you, if you have an opportunity, The Winner's Brain. If you are a runner, he has a book called The Runner's Brain, which a lot I know marathon runners have read. Great visit with Jeff Brown, our guest today here on Lebanon Now. In the Box, I'm David Millsap.